Welcome back, everyone. I have quite a long video for you all today, but I have linked the time codes with the particular questions that we're going to be talking about today. So if you want to go ahead and skip to a certain question, feel free to do that. Just check out that description box down below. And otherwise, I hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoyed making it. All right, so I have a very special treat, and I have three lovely ladies who have agreed to talk with me and with you all about the MBE program at Harvard. And so without further ado, I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Katie. I haven't officially graduated yet, but sort of finished the year. I am a chronic student, so I'm going to med school next year. And yeah, that's it for me.
And I am Shika. I am a NICU nurse, which is the neonatal ICU. And I am graduating from the MBE program this year and then going on to do a fellowship in pediatric ethics next.
Exciting. Hi, I'm Kelsey. I am an oncology nurse in Boston, and I got my undergrad in nursing, and then was inspired to pursue this program, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to you guys.
Yeah, so Kelsey and I are both in the part-time program. If you've seen any of some of my past videos, you know that typically the program's done in 1 year. So that's what Katie and Shika have done. And then Kelsey and I are both doing the part-time program, which takes course over 2 years. So let's get started with some of the questions that you all submitted to ask about the MBE program. So first question, biggest one, I feel like we all get, I know I get all the time. What brought you to bioethics?
I wasn't sure if we were going in the same order. Go ahead, Kelsey. I don't want to go, so go ahead.
So I work with oncology patients, so patients with cancer, and then I do a lot of end-of-life care, and it was the conflict and the dilemmas that I experienced at the bedside with my patients and their families that really drove me to pursue this degree and kind of dive deeper into ways in which we can approach the problems that I experience clinically. So that's why I pursued bioethics.
I think my path was similar to Kelsey. In my clinical experiences led me to bioethics. I was really interested in exploring the intersection of health equity, social justice, and bioethics. And I think my hospital had a lot of opportunities for professional development. And so I just attended events and learned more about what bioethics was and kind of found my passion, and then accidentally ended up in the program.
Okay, so I've formulated some thoughts. I think for me, there was a clinical piece that actually relates to both Kelsey and Chika's experiences, like just shadowing as a student. There were certain tensions that I saw between certain physicians, particularly in OB, which I thought was really interesting. And so that played a role. I think also I did attend during college a service trip. And upon doing so, and I don't necessarily know if any of you guys knew this, but we talked a bit about it in one of our courses. And I felt a lot of I don't know if it was moral distress, maybe I can put the label on it now, but I felt a lot of at least cognitive dissonance at the time, just being what the heck is going on? And it did end up being it was a reputable organization. So it's not necessarily that I fully regret, the work that was being done, but a lot of critical self-reflection went into that and made me think okay, how do I answer these questions that I have in my own head? And then thirdly, I did have more of a personal experience as well, just with my grandmother's death. I think it was, I don't know if it was a year or two ago. Time has flown, but just end of life care. And that was a really strange experience because of the care that she received. And my grandfather being her proxy and just being too emotionally distraught to really think through what she would have wanted. So a kind of whole cocktail of things for me.
I feel like I accidentally ended up in bioethics is sort of a common theme from what I understand. It's definitely how I felt about it
and, you know, being in my MPH program and sort of working in biotech and then like being exposed to some of these like bioethical issues and being like, wow, that's a whole field. That's a whole nother master's that, as Katie said, I can be a perpetual student about.
Like I was telling you guys a little bit earlier, I had no idea that it was a field that I could pursue a degree in until I was talking to my boss about it. At work, we have to submit narratives and like talk about a patient experience. And I just, Katie, I was resonating with what you were saying about end of life and some of the issues you run into with people being emotionally distressed when their loved one is dying and not really knowing which way to go and what to do and what's the right thing to do. And I was talking about all these things with my boss, and I was then told that you could pursue a degree in bioethics, which was so wonderful. And I'm so glad that I did it.
So that kind of brings me to another question of why did you choose Harvard? So there's not a lot of bioethics programs out there, but there are a few. And so I know some of you might have already been in the Boston area and maybe that was an influence, but are there any thoughts you had on sort of why you chose Harvard and did you apply to other programs?
I think, well, I am not from the Boston area. I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so kind of a bit of a far journey. Back to what I was saying about accidentally ending up at Harvard. So I actually attended a conference and the director of the program was on a panel, and I like got up the courage and asked a really tough question. And then I decided to email him after, and he responded and said, why don't you apply? And so that's how I ended up here. It wasn't necessarily intentional. It was just kind of like a course of events, fate, if you want to call it that.
I love that.
Yeah, so my story is it's a little different, but I'd love to hear how you all ended up at Harvard too.
I love that.
I had no idea. That's so great.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, the power of an email. If you want something, reach out.
Right? Networking. No.
Yes, networking.
I actually chose Harvard because I was told about the program, and so then started exploring other programs just in case I didn't get in, because it was something that I was passionate about. And I wanted to be in person. So most of the programs I found were online, and I said, I want to be in person in the classroom. But here we are. Then COVID happened. But they did such an incredible job this past year online and keeping us engaged and connecting us all together. So it was the in-person piece that really
Well, I love that though. That's so funny. Aw, rip. But I think well, for me, I think it was similar, where it was kind of like I knew about the Harvard program and applied, and then there were a couple that had like other deadlines, and so I was like, let me just see what happens with this, and if it doesn't work out, I'll like, you know, consider applying to them. But yeah, I just knew about the Harvard program and then kind of went with it.
Yeah, because the other programs have typically later deadlines than the Harvard did. That was exactly how I started my applications to Katie. So I think this is a really hard question for me because I personally decided I wanted to do the Harvard MBE program and applied and was like, if it doesn't work out, there's programs with later deadlines. I'm just going to put it out in the ether and see what happens. So when people ask me if I have any application tips, it's always a difficult question for me, but I'm interested to hear if you guys have any application tips, because I feel like I probably didn't strategize my application as well as I could have, and definitely not as well as I did for like my MPH applications or like for med school applications coming up. So
I would say don't be afraid to be vulnerable. I think in my personal statement, or however they name it, I just decided to be very vulnerable, and half of it was actually an anecdote about a patient experience I had. So, and in bioethics, it's the type of subject where you have to use your heart and your mind at the same time. And so vulnerability is necessary, especially when you're thinking about being, when you're thinking about critical thinking and about your own power and privilege. It involves a lot of vulnerability and a lot of like soul searching. And so I think I tried to make that come across in my personal statement. And then I would also say when you're picking people to write your letters of recommendation, pick people who know you from different stages. And so I picked somebody from my undergrad nursing program, somebody who had seen me through my nursing residency program, and then another person who had seen me at my hospital. And so kind of pick people who could speak to you, speak about you from different points in your life.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, such good advice. I 100% agree with you, Shika. I put so much heart into my personal statement, and was very vulnerable. I also talked about a patient experience. So sorry for the dog in the background. Um, but I remember like really just being like, is this too personal? And then just being like, you know what? That's what, like, seemingly what bioethics is. So I told my story, I put it all out on the line. And I think that was fantastic about advice about who to get your letters of recommendation from.
Yeah. I'm still like, how you phrase that, Chica, was like just so salient and like beautiful. Like, and it just kind of like came out. I feel like you have so many of these like amazing, just like sentences and phrases that you say that are just incredible. But yeah, like what a great way of explaining bioethics as a field is like using your heart and your mind at the same time. I I also don't know how my memory is like not super fabulous, and so I don't even remember really what I put in my app. I do like I 100% concur though, both with Kelsey and Shika. Like I think I definitely know I put the anecdote about like my grandmother in there, so 100% vulnerability, and I think like just adding to that based on at least my experiences through this year in this program, like that is something that is highly valued. You know, as Shika said, just learning about the field and navigating it, like actively engaging in it through this master's, degree and program. The vulnerability aspect is pretty huge. So.
Yeah, and I will just say, because Katie, you applied straight out of undergrad, right? And then I applied 2 years out of undergrad after my master's. And then Shika and Kelsey, you guys have been working and then applied after you've been in the field for a little bit too. So I think that that can be somewhat nerve-wracking, especially for maybe younger applicants. But Katie's definitely a great example, and that people like come into this program straight out of undergrad, because I think it can seem very intimidating, and there's practicing physicians and practicing nurses and practicing lawyers like all in our program, and it can be very intimidating for someone who hasn't been out in the workforce yet and has only ever been in school. And so I put myself in that category too. But I feel like such great like advice application wise. And the Harvard program is so small in like such a good way that I think that, our program director like has looked at all of our applications and all of our personal statements. And so I think that's sort of what was reassuring to me after I knew that later. And that's sort of the type of reassurance I try to give when people are asking about the program.
Yeah. And I also want to say that it's also intimidating. I had been out of school for 10 years. So it was intimidating writing an essay because like I hadn't written something formal in years. And then coming into like a group of people where some have been in school and have done incredible things and have worked on incredible projects. And then there are others who in the professional world sometimes like rank higher than me. So I had this like feeling of, oh my gosh, do I really belong here? But I felt so welcomed by the program. And I feel like we were all so open and real with each other and really got to know each other at the beginning, and it made me feel like I had less of an imposter syndrome. after a couple weeks. So
I would also say, like, it was such a supportive learning environment, and it's so easy to get imposter syndrome, especially at Harvard. Like, I think of myself as just like regular, and I never thought like Harvard would be in my life trajectory. And here I am in this program sitting next to people who have been working in the field, who have taught at Harvard, or are just doing this program to like write a book, or all of these super, super established people. But I feel like the learning environment was so supportive that we were all able to learn from each other. And there are people from all over the world and different age ranges, and so I really loved that aspect, being able to learn and grow and connect with so many different types of people at so many different places in their lives and all over the world.
Which I think is perfectly leading into my next question, which is sort of about your highlights and maybe hurdles in the program. So for Kelsey and I, that's what we've experienced so far. And then Katie and Shika are done. So they can kind of speak to the whole program and also speak to it from a full-time perspective. Whereas Kelsey and I can talk about what we've experienced in our first year of our part-time.
mm-hmm. I can go first. I would say I'm going to start with the hurdle because I like ending on a positive note. But I would say the biggest like hurdle I encountered was that imposter syndrome at the beginning, feeling like I didn't have much to bring to the table compared to like the accomplishments and the greatness of all of my classmates. Got over that really quickly. But the other hurdle was I work full time and am in school part time, and so there were moments where I felt like the balance of what I had to do for school, like felt too much with work, but I also like was dealing with a lot of what we discussed in class, which was necessary, had to do with everything that came out of COVID. And I was a COVID ICU nurse. And so there was like a lot of like mental health stuff that I was working through at the beginning of the year, but everyone was so supportive. Not only you guys being my classmates, but also the faculty was incredible in giving me the space I needed in order to do the work I had to do and continue to show up for my patients. So it like I found my balance, I found my groove, and then the best part of the program was meeting you guys, and really just everyone inspired me to want to do more. And I think the justice aspect of all of our classes really opened my eyes to the opportunity that we have to actually make a difference in our own fields, but also like in the world at large. And I know that sounds like so grandiose, but I just feel so hopeful at the end of my first year. And I'm super stoked to plan my capstone, which is our big project that we do throughout the year. But yeah, I think the diversity in our class and just the incredible people I got to meet through the program really were the highlight, because you think one way and it just completely, I think it added on great layers and additions to the way I look at the world and how I look at conflict and any problems. So I'll stop talking.
Oh, that was so good, Kelsey. I think I'll start with hurdles as well and end on a high note. I think one of the hurdles as a full-timer was definitely the workload. You are doing 36 credits in a full year, and so you do have to time manage and be really cognizant of how you're using your time and what you're putting it toward. So I would say that's definitely one of the hurdles, but you know, like as you go, you get it figured out. But I would say a highlight though is the feeling you get after you submit like a huge assignment. Like part of the capstone that Kelsey was talking about is doing a literature review, and I remember submitting it and just feeling like so proud, and like I had not been that proud of myself in a long time. And so
I'm proud of you.
oh, thank you. So yeah, I would say a highlight is definitely like the feeling you get after you accomplish something huge. And I will say that the school and the program does push you to be the best you and in the best way possible. But at the same time, you have to kind of balance it with life and with mental health and everything that's happening in the world, because as everyone knows right now is kind of a chaotic time with COVID and everything that's happening with racial justice and all of that. And it also applies to bioethics. So you have to be very aware of how much you're taking in and how you take care of yourself as well. And then I'll say one more highlight is definitely the people. I think even though we were on Zoom for the whole year, the connections and the conversations that you have that are brought on by this program are really worthwhile, and you build really, really strong bonds with the people you're in class with. And so that's definitely a highlight. And I will remember you all and hopefully be friends with you all for years and years to come, because we made it through this year together. Yes.
Oh, so amazing. Wow. I feel like so energized. Like you guys are talking about all the good things. I'm like, heck yeah. Okay. I had to write them down because again, the memory, but so I very much felt the imposter syndrome that Kelsey you were talking about. And I think for me, like it carried on pretty much until like the last month and a half, maybe. Like, of course, like it initially was fed by like my youth, you know, just like really feeling very inadequate in terms of like degrees. And I think like my college experience, at least like my confidence was like beat down like a little, just like a little bit. And so coming in here, I was like, well, this is going to be the same exact thing. Like, you know what I mean? And I think there's certain people in our program, understandably so, that can speak with a lot of like gusto and like gravitas that like I had not learned yet. And so it kind of, you know, on no fault of theirs, just, you know, personally from my own experiences, I very much felt that imposter syndrome. But yeah, I think that does feed into the highlight of kind of now feeling more educated and enabled, especially with something that is just so relevant to everyday life in a way that I hadn't engaged with before in my education, really ever. Like not even in college and certainly not in high school and before that, you know, like something that's so timely. So there's the imposter syndrome feeding into feeling just more prepared. I think also another hurdle was like the readings. Like there was a lot for me, like as someone who came in with a science background. I was used to like P sets, you know what I mean, like solving problems as opposed to reading hundreds of pages. But all amazing readings, you know what I mean? And I think like once I got out of my mindset of, oh, this is so hard because of the number of pages, once I got into like the material, I felt differently and it kind of like sped by a little faster. And then in terms of moving more so into the highlights that I wrote down, two things, obviously the people, as you guys had mentioned, like just so amazing. And I just am so grateful to all of you. And I don't know if the Zoom experience may have added to that. I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, there's just something interesting about being in my own space and the ambiance of it, and then the comfort level, whatever. And then also, and I'd mentioned this a little bit in one of our other courses, is like this self-forgiveness element for me of like bioethics and learning just about the sheer differences between individuals and how that kind of has like helped me be more accepting of like, hey, I might be right sometimes, you know, like I'm not always wrong, you know, like if I'm engaging in a debate, like respecting my own point of view, I think was something that I had a lot of trouble with. And after this year of kind of learning just the diversity of moralities and like, you know, ways of thinking that people can have and how that foundation stems into the ways we operate in everyday life and the differences we hold in that way as well. And so I've more forgiving of myself and I think of other people. So
I think that's such a great way to phrase it, though, Katie, of just saying that, you know, you sort of have this backup of theory and ideas when you're in conversations and in quote unquote arguments or strong discussions with people about things, like you have this backup. And I think that part of my like hardest part though was particularly like in clinical ethics, just confronting all of these like really hard, difficult cases, which I'm sure has a lot to do with, you know, not having any clinical experience really, like not in any type of formal way for sure. And, you know, reaching these conclusions that it's just like, wow, like this isn't the helping people type of part of our personalities, I'm sure all of us have, like, it doesn't feel right to that part of my like personality and my soul and whatever you want to call it. But like ethically and, sort of coming to terms with a lot of those types of things, I think was one of my biggest hurdles, especially in the very beginning. But so speaking of hurdles, and then we'll transition to high notes. So, but speaking of hurdles, is there anything you would have done differently or anything you wish you had known before you started? I know that's a really hard question.
I think I would have cooled off on the networking, but I think I just had such a preoccupation because I did the full-time, it was just 1 year, like I had such a preoccupation with figuring out what to do next. I knew in the back of my head, I knew I wanted to go back to bedside, but at the same time, with everything going on in the world and how applicable it was to bioethics, I kind of wanted to continue with that same momentum and do something bioethics related. And so I definitely spent a lot of time networking and meeting new people, but that also is quite time consuming, especially when you have such a full class load. So I wish I would have given myself more grace and more patience in trying to figure out what to do after graduation, and kind of like live in the moment, especially in the first semester. But things did figure themselves out. I don't necessarily regret all the networking, but I would say I wish I took a little more time for myself versus this preoccupation with trying to figure out what's next, because Harvard affords you a lot of opportunities. And so with the name comes a lot. And so it would have been nice to just sit back a little bit, especially at the beginning stages.
I'll say I was the opposite. I wish that I had networked a little bit more, just because the way my work schedule was, and then with classes, I just wasn't able to participate as much in like the extra stuff outside of class. And so because of that, I'm cutting down my hours next year so that I can like have specific days off where I can go to the conferences or um, whether they're in person or on Zoom, and have more time to network and go to like office hours with and have good conversation with people outside of class time. So that's something I wish I had done more this year, but I also have more time. So that was another reason why I like wasn't so like urgent in doing it, because I knew I have like another year ahead of me.
I'm laughing because my year's done and I did zero networking. So I'm like, right. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it's so funny because in terms of looking back on like anytime somebody asks me like, what do you wish you would have done different? I always struggle with that question because I'm like, I don't know what I would have changed and therefore what the outcome would have been. And if that would have been better than where I am now, because I'm very grateful for like the person that I've become as a result of my experiences through the program. And so I always struggle with like tweaking any little bit, because that is like, to me, it would presume a result that I don't necessarily know would actually happen. So I think like all else like if where I am today could be improved as opposed to changed by anything that I would have done, then I think I probably should have talked to more of these like cool people. But again, like that fed into my natural journey of having major imposter syndrome due to like age, degree, whatever, you know what I mean? Like prior experiences. So it's just so tough to then like, expect more of myself, but then am I being like too light on myself? I don't know. So yeah, I think that question I always struggle with. In terms of what I wish I would have known, I don't know. I mean, maybe like, I think maybe knowing how philosophical it would have been, but I don't know if that would have changed, how I felt about it. Yeah, just because I didn't know that going in, but that's more of like a fact-based thing as opposed to any sort of grandiose like, oh, I wish I would have known X because then I would have done something differently. I just think it would have been cool tidbit of info to know that we'd be talking so much about consequentialism and like Kant and like when it rolls, like, you know what I mean? Like, I just couldn't, which I guess makes sense because morality and ethics and stuff, but yeah, just that, I guess.
And don't get stuck in the theory. I think that I was so hung up on like, okay, I have to remember all of these theories after the first semester. And then it just comes so naturally once you start to, like, second semester, I felt like with foundations and applying it to real life scenarios. Like, I think that I was like, oh, wow, okay, like this is fine. I can keep this little chart in my back pocket, but you figure it out. But there was so much pressure I put on myself about like really trying to remember the names and who did what and all this. And it's important, yes, but it's not the end of the world if you don't remember.
I think it too, all of us come from some level of like basic science background, at least like in our undergrad education. And I feel like that's just so drilled into you of like memorization and facts and like that type of thing. And this program is completely not that.
Opposite.
Yeah.
Completely
Lots of
opposite.
papers.
Which I feel like was like a really good thing and a really bad thing for me, at least personally, because any other academic experience I had had, for better or for worse, was they're looking for a particular thing. And you give them that particular thing and you learn how to give them that thing. And that's not how this program is for the most part. And so I think can be very difficult. I know we're kind of coming back sort of to the maybe a hurdle, but also something I maybe wish I would have known is sort of how much leeway and freedom of thought and expression, as cliche as that might sound, that you're given in most of our classes. And also,
They
I
want us
just,
to develop our voice.
yeah, exactly. And I think what Katie said about sort of like the person that you've become like out of this program, I think is just so poignant and like, yeah, like I do kind of as cliche and as, maybe dramatic as that might sound, I kind of feel, like the way I think about things and the way I'm sure we all think about things now is completely different, and the way you interact with other people, and you kind of grow a lot as a person very quickly. And I think that can be sort of like a growing pain. Particularly, I'm sure for you all doing the full-time program, doing that all in 1 year, I can't imagine. Which does kind of bring me to a question that's pointed mostly at Kelsey about, sort of your thoughts on the part-time program and your experience, especially since you were actually working during the part-time program, which is, what the part-time program is meant for. And I was not. I was supposed to be, but pandemic. So
So it's actually pretty funny because I had applied for the full-time program thinking I could work full-time and do this program full-time. So glad that Brooke and Becca steered me in the other direction, because they said they really wanted me to enjoy the program while still like enjoying my job. And I think that was the best advice they could have given me, because I was able to actually like take time to focus on the material. Whereas I feel like if I had to work full-time and be in full-time school, and I needed to work full-time, like I wasn't ready to leave the bedside just yet. But I feel like my experience, especially this past year, really like gave me so much to bring to the classroom and like share with everybody. But the part-time program is fantastic. I'm so happy I have another year. And I was able to breathe a little bit. And it's only now, like sitting here at the end of my first year, that I can see that like, oh, like, okay, this is okay. Like, I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be great. There were some tears, I'm not going to lie, but that was all like my own thing. But, school's stressful, as is the job that I do. So I think the part-time program really lends to being able to learn so much and be able to have these conversations while still doing the work that you love, that you want to bring bioethics into. And I feel like I was able to share a lot of it with my coworkers. They've learned a lot of tidbits of bioethics, so it's fun.
I'm so pleased with how well this is flowing because we're moving on to our sort of coming out of the bioethics program set of questions, and a very probably at least difficult for me question of what are the most applicable skills that you feel like you have learned in the program. I guess for Katie and for Shika, you can tell us maybe a little bit about your capstone projects just to sort of show how bioethics can be applied if you would like. But I think that's a difficult question and one that understandably is asked in a program and a field that is can be so theoretical and like philosophical.
I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways I have coming out of this program is asking the right questions, because I will warn, do not go into bioethics thinking you will find answers. You might not. And so I think the program equipped me pretty well to ask a lot of really important questions. And then in regard to my capstone, it was such a difficult yet beautiful experience because I learned how to do research. I had to do an IRB application. And if you don't know what an IRB is, it basically approves research that involves human subjects. And my research was looking at a patient navigation startup and how it affected or increased self-reported health status. And that kind of also ties into health disparity and social determinants of health. And so I got my real firsthand proper research experience. I learned a lot about the rigor of academia and research. Part of my placement was at the startup, and I got to present my research to the chief medical officer and like a whole meeting with people, and we got critiques and we got good feedback and bad feedback. And so it was just such an amazing learning process on like how to improve my research and how to do the IRB process, how to ask a lot of really, really important questions. And so it just kind of prepared me for my future trajectory, because I do want to go into research at some point and hopefully do like a nursing PhD and do nursing research and kind of better the field in that way.
Oh my gosh.
That's so awesome.
I don't know how to follow that. Yeah. I mean, like nurse PhD, that's amazing. And of course, like, so Sheik and I were in the same capstone group as well. I'm like, she could just doing like you did, like there's a spectrum of what you could do for the capstone, and Sheikah like just like like blew off the end of like any sort of expectation. I just need to say that. Every time I say something, I'm like, Sheikah, like what was the first question besides the capstone stuff? Because I was just
Most applicable skills.
Oh, okay, fabulous. So yeah, so I think Shika's point, of course, like I certainly resonate with in terms of asking the right questions. I think for me as well, like, I mean, I mentioned the like confidence element, but I think like the critical thought and the way that they like make us think about things in a very systematic way helped me gain confidence in the words coming out of my mouth, because if it was organized in my brain, it would be decently organized coming out of my mouth, and then would make me seem or like, you know, communicate the information well, or even sound more intelligent, and therefore have other people listen to me more, you know, like it's like a reciprocal kind of relationship there. So I think for me, it was certainly the critical thought and just like engaging in really intellectual conversations that I thought that I like wasn't smart enough for. And so to like gate, like it's all a confidence thing. Wow, we're just learning that I just needed confidence this year. For me, that was like a big thing. Is just like realizing that, hey, like now that I learn about all these different frameworks or learn about different ethical dilemmas in clinical ethics or even within the environment, and learning about terms like reciprocity, like, you know, and even like intergenerational justice, like just these concepts that are so important to the ways we currently move about society, and being able to actually articulate, like, it's so powerful. And then just like, again, like, makes me feel more grounded and confident as a person, in the sense that like I'm engaging, but like being helpful when I engage with people, instead of being like empty, like there's some substance behind it. So yeah, I think for me it was less of any sort of single or a handful of learned applicable skills in the sense of what we normally think of skills. It was more so over the trajectory of the year, just the type of education and type of material it lends towards these other types of skills that are more like implicit as opposed to explicit.
So I know that Kelsey still has to tell us what she feels like she learned, but I do want to quickly ask you, Katie, what your feelings about potentially what the program may or may not have given you that you felt like gave you some type of potential help or advantage or like way of thinking and talking during your med school applications, because I do have a lot of people who watch who may or may not be, thinking about going to medical school. So I was just curious really quick while we were on what I felt like is probably a similar topic, how you feel like the program has led into your med school apps and the whole application and interview process.
Okay, so I clearly got very excited about that, because I think that it helped me a lot in the sense of like me personally, the experience as Katie, right? Again, I can only presume if it had any impact on how, admissions went. I don't know, right? Like that's on them. The process itself, like whatever. I think for me, at least, like I definitely felt more confident being able to talk to somebody. And I will say that the unique, I was just about to say particularities, and then I didn't. Particularities. The particularities of like a med school interview, where they often ask you about like, the MMI, right? Which is the multiple mini interview, which asks you literally about ethical scenarios, like literally about clinical ethics scenarios. And I was going through these interviews during clinical ethics, and they would like ask me a question, and it was like a very similar case to like what we had done. And so I'd be like, yeah, like, let me just tell you what I think. And it would be like a thought from, something that maybe Gigi had brought up, you know what I mean? Like, it was very helpful in that sense, in that it just directly translated to that particular form of the interview. In terms of just like, oh, tell me about this on your app, that's a different story. But the MMI, for sure, it's like a one-to-one. And so I felt very like solid and prepared, not as though I did like a brief Google search on the MMI and just had to come up with a framework. Like I had like an integration of frameworks in my brain, because of this education, which makes sense. Like it would be terrible if I didn't. So, but yeah, to answer your question.
And you're going to be a better doctor because of it.
Oh, 100%. Yes. There's zero doubt about that. Yeah.
So I think that maybe we can go to Kelsey first, but sort of integrate this very last question that I have of sort of what's next and how do you plan to use your MBE? So I feel like Kelsey and I are still sort of off the hot seat a little bit because we still have a year left, but sort of combination question to you, Kelsey, of like applicable skills and how you plan to use them. And then for Shika and for Katie, sort of what's next. Obviously, we talked about med school a little bit with Katie, but go ahead.
I love what Shika and Katie said about like learning the right questions to ask. And then I was just thinking, and then like getting confidence to have these conversations. I think it's so important to be able to have these conversations with people outside of our bioethics bubble. Taylor and Katie, I know that we've had this conversation before about how we all have this like world that like we're learning and we can all bounce like ideas off of each other, but to be able to have this conversation with like people in like on the streets and talk about social justice, talk about race issues, talk about the like failings in policy and procedure when it comes to COVID-19, and to be able to do it in an eloquent and confident way. I think it brings so much power if you can, if you know that you have the backing and the knowledge and you've had these conversations before, it really helps. And it helps make small changes, like in the way other people think. And then the other thing I was thinking applicable is like, we learned how to talk in metaphors this year. And I think the biggest metaphor I think of is that like the world was very black and white prior to this program. In the world of science, it is very like black and white. There's a right and there's a wrong. And then bioethics just threw a ton of color into it. Oh, I love your glasses. Those are great.
They're lenses. They're red.
Oh, they're lenses.
Another metaphor.
Another metaphor.
I
So
broke
great.
them out.
So just really like seeing the beauty that this program, like, I know that sounds so like hippy dippy, but there's a lot of beauty that having these philosophical conversations while applying it to like what goes on in the world, like it brings so much beauty forward and forth. And then I hope that I can make some changes in the world. That's what I hope to do with this degree. I don't know where I'm going to go with it. As you said, Taylor, we have a whole nother year. So something, I feel like the universe is going to give me what I need or put me where I'm supposed to be.
Beautifully said. For me, what's next? I'm doing a fellowship in pediatric ethics. Came back to my love of the pediatric population as a NICU nurse. I definitely miss the babies, but I also wanted to pursue my passion for research, especially as it pertains to health equity, disparity, and social justice. And I found a fellowship that is focusing in on those issues. And the fellowship is research-based, so I basically have a whole year to do what I want, as long as it relates to ethics in the pediatric population. And so I'm really, really excited to do that. And yeah, so that's what's next for me. And I think the program definitely 100% prepared me to go into this because I have a research experience. I have experience talking about these difficult subjects and networking with all the folks who are also networking with the folks at the location for my fellowship. And so I've been able to meet so many incredible people who are experts in their, or quote unquote experts in the field, and learn from them as I go into this next professional opportunity. And so that's what's next for me. And I think the program just was like a perfect transition into this.
Oh my gosh, so amazing. I'm so psyched for you. Yeah, I think for me, like, as you know, we said, like, I'm definitely going to carry like this education into med school. And I think just handling the difficult scenarios, which are inevitably going to arise, like this education certainly going to help me with that. When you guys are talking, for some reason, I don't know why my brain went here, but I all of a sudden was like, oh no, like I felt so hopeful in this program because I think like what you said, Kelsey, about it being like very beautiful to like learn about these things in a certain way. And like, yeah, sort of hippy dippy, but I like love the hippy dippy. Like I like live and breathe that. And so, yeah, but I was thinking about it and I was like, oh no, like once I move out of this type of higher education of kind of like engaging with a really amazing group of people who are focused on ethics and morality and flourishing and like just the promotion of like the well-being of all people and all things, you know, all beings, like I all of a sudden was like, oh no, like what's next you're gonna be like for me, trying to kind of take this experience and like take the person that I've become in this like bubble and like bring it outside the bubble. Like what's that going to look like? Like am I going to become more cynical? You know what I mean? Like will I need to kind of like revisit this like bioethical space to kind of revitalize and like re-energize that hope in order to kind of carry it through the like actual real experiences that, you know, of justice, you know, like what actually has to be done, like the real activity, you know what I mean? So I feel like that's any such like a low note, but anyway, just more critical thought of like, yeah, what is it actually going to mean to take this education and apply it to the real world, and like know that it's going to be messy? Because I think education as an institution is very beautiful. You can kind of sit in a room and talk eloquently about issues, and that's all fun and games, but like once you bring it to the real world, like what's going to happen to this, you know, new mindset that I have. So anyway,
It is messy, and
Yeah.
you got this.
A beautiful
You
mess.
got your toolkit.
Oh gosh.
I was going to say, I feel like if there's one takeaway from the bioethics program, and honestly, our talk tonight, it's that bioethics is not black and white. And I just love the variety of experiences we have, even in this 4-person group. And I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to talk and answer some of the questions and your experiences with the MBE program.